Episode 8. The Final Moment. The experience of loss is a common aspect of life. There is birth and death, meeting and parting. Everyone in this world has gone through some form of loss, whether it be of cherished possessions or loved ones. However, caring for a loved one in their final moments and watching them slowly depart can seem like immense suffering for those who do not understand the principles of Dharma or the nature of life. I was one of those individuals. At the end of March 2018, I took my loved one for a routine health checkup. But this time it was the last. The doctor diagnosed that the illness had progressed beyond treatment. I was bewildered, as there had been no warning signs. While the patient was under the care of the nurses, I secretly called my brother, who is a doctor, and explained the symptoms. He speculated that there might not be much time left. After hanging up, I stood silently in front of the patient's room. At that moment, my mind entered a state of emptiness automatically. There were no thoughts, no feelings. Yet, I remained fully aware, conscious of everything happening around me. My mind was clear, devoid of any distracting thoughts. I focused solely on the patient, which brought them comfort both physically and emotionally. Subsequently, the patient required surgery to alleviate their current condition, although it was not a treatment for the illness itself. After the surgery, the doctor permitted us to take the patient home for care. The hospital provided assistance by managing and facilitating everything, including the transfer of the patient, delivering necessary equipment, providing a manual for observing end-of-life symptoms, contact information for the doctors and nurses, and a list of companies to contact for managing the body or handling paperwork with the authorities after the patient passed away. At that time, I didn't pay attention to the details. I simply collected all the documents and focused on the patient. I tried to maintain awareness and accept the situation I was facing. This state of mindfulness allowed me to realize what needed to be done and how to handle the circumstances in front of me. Wisdom arose alongside my awareness and concentration, free from desires or aversions, and without any distractions. I remained mindful and concentrated on the physical and mental state of the patient. Throughout the day, I focused on discussing positive stories and good deeds to prevent the patient from dwelling on their illness, which could lead to a heavy heart. The first day passed relatively easily, but by the second day, I noticed that the patient began to hallucinate, saying they saw unfamiliar people. Around 10 p.m., the patient complained of increasing pain, and even after administering morphine, the pain persisted. I decided to call the doctor for advice. After describing the symptoms, about 20 minutes later, a nurse arrived to observe the situation and check the vital signs. She then called me into the kitchen to discuss that we could increase the morphine dosage if the patient continued to experience pain, but that the condition had worsened, and it was unlikely they would last through the night. I stood quietly for a moment after the nurse left, then returned my focus to the patient, talking as usual and reminiscing about past events, such as their time as a monk, practicing meditation, or doing good deeds. I hoped to encourage thoughts of their past merits. The patient began to calm down and fell asleep. At 11:30 p.m., it was time for the next dose of medication, but this time the clear white liquid I administered flowed back out as a black liquid. At that moment, I felt a slight jolt, then refocused on cleaning up. The patient had a couple of convulsions, and upon checking, I found there was no breath. I immediately understood that the final moment had truly arrived. I whispered in his ear, "Sleep peacefully, don't worry. I will take care of everything well." I wasn't sure if the patient could hear my final words, but it was all I could do at that moment. After cleaning the body, I instinctively called family members to inform them of the passing and to ask for forgiveness on behalf of the patient. I then called for staff to come and manage the body. I remember handling everything quietly and calmly, with full awareness until it was all done. When the staff arrived, they swiftly and professionally removed all the equipment and transferred the body. I stood silently observing the process until they finished and took the body away. I followed them, watching the vehicle carry the still body out of sight. Then I returned to the room, staring at the empty bed, seeing the medical equipment, oxygen tank, and the tangled hoses that remained. My mind began to wander, and I lost my composure. Thoughts flooded in. What was happening? Why did I let my loved one go with someone unknown? I immediately clung to the still body as if it belonged to me, and my mind continued to churn with worries about where the body would go tonight, whether it would be cold, and why I let them leave with someone I didn't know. Eventually, I collapsed onto the bed, curled up. My awareness returned as I realized my body was curled like a shrimp, and I heard my sobs growing louder until I was shaking. Strangely, another voice inside me urged, "It's okay to cry it out. Tomorrow there will be much to take care of." After that, I cried myself to sleep. The experience of loss is a common reality that every family will face sooner or later. The difference lies in how much awareness individuals possess when encountering the final moment. In truth, there are two types of separation: separation in life and separation in death. People tend to place greater importance on death because it represents a significant loss that cannot be reversed. However, we often forget that separation in life is also important, as it is uncertain whether we will have the opportunity to meet again after parting. Every meeting is, in fact, the beginning of a farewell, an unavoidable truth. It is evident that everyone has a final moment, as death is a natural part of life. Have you ever wondered why, when death is a natural occurrence, people still feel sorrow? Or why this sorrow varies from person to person when a death occurs? The root of suffering is not merely the death of a loved one, but rather the craving within our hearts that resists the idea of losing them. The phrase "our loved one" implies a possessiveness over the deceased. If the deceased were a stranger, we would not feel the same sorrow, because we have no relationship or attachment to them. For instance, if someone named Mr. A, whom we have never known, were to die in an accident, we would not feel grief because there is no connection or claim over Mr. A. Thus, suffering does not arise. However, when it involves someone we know, our attachment immediately creates suffering. Many people might argue that accepting this truth is difficult, even when following logic and reason. This is because ordinary people, who are still caught up in defilements and attachments, experience suffering and sadness when they lose loved ones. They do not yet see the reality that is right in front of them. It is only when the mind has been trained and developed to a finer level that it can perceive the truth more clearly.